the vast sun-scorched heart of the Dakota Territory, a promise made beneath a lover's moon was broken under the merciless glare of a noonday sun. A wagon carrying the future of a family became a tomb, and the sacred act of childbirth became a death sentence. This is not just a tale of survival against the elements. It is the story of Ilara Thorne, a woman left for dead with her newborn twin sons, the Lakota warrior, who defied his own sorrow to save them, and the 20-year echo of a lie that would eventually bring a town built on greed to its knees. What happens when the ghosts you bury in the desert refuse to stay dead? Stay with us as we unravel a story of motherhood murder and the cruelest kind of karma the West has ever known. Part 1. The Bitter Earth. The heat was a physical entity, a shimmering beast that pressed down on the canvas of the Conestoga wagon, baking the air within into a suffocating loaf. Ilara Thorne, her belly swollen to a taut drum, felt every rut and rock in the trail as a jolt of pure agony. Sweat pasted her calico dress to her skin, and her braid of honey-blonde hair had long since come loose, clinging to her damp neck. "Just a little further, my love," Jebediah said, his voice, a soothing balm that no longer reached the frantic core of her fear. "The pass is just ahead. We'll make camp on the other side where there's water." Jebediah Thorne was a man carved from the handsome, rugged timber of the frontier myth. With eyes the color of a summer sky and a smile that could charm a rattlesnake, he had won her heart back in Ohio, painting pictures of a sprawling ranch in the Dakotas, a legacy for their children. He had inherited the land claim from a distant uncle, a deed that promised rich soil, and he'd whispered to her late at night rumors of gold. But the man who sat on the driver's bench now seemed a stranger. His smiles were thin, his eyes distant. For the last week since they'd been joined by a quiet, grim-faced hired hand named Silas Croft, a chill had settled between them that had nothing to do with the cool desert nights. The first contraction tore through her with the force of a lightning strike. She cried out, clutching the wooden side of the wagon bed. Jebediah stopped the wagon instantly, his face a mask of concern. "It's time," she gasped, her knuckles white. Here Jebediah exchanged a look with Silas, a fleeting, dark communication that Ilara was too consumed by pain to decipher. No, we must get you to shelter to water." He drove the oxen harder, but the babe would not wait for a more convenient location. The second contraction was a wave that threatened to pull her under. The world narrowed to the stifling confines of the wagon, the smell of dust and canvas, and the fire ripping through her body. Hours bled into a blur of pain and prayer. Jebediah and Silas worked with a clumsy, panicked urgency boiling water that was already gritty with sand. As the unforgiving sun began its descent, painting the Badlands in hues of orange and blood, Ilara's first son was born. He was small, with a tuft of pale hair and his mother's determined cry. They named him Caleb. Exhaustion was a heavy cloak, but a fierce, primal love surged through her. She held the squirming bundle to her chest, her heart overflowing. But her body was not done. A second wave of labor, sharp and shocking, seized her. Jebediah's face went from concerned to aghast. "Twins," he whispered the word, "an accusation." The second boy, Noah, arrived, as the last light faded smaller and quieter than his brother. He was darker of hair and complexion, a stark contrast to Caleb's fairness. Ilara, delirious with pain and fatigue, saw only the miracle of 2 healthy sons. She must have drifted off. When she awoke, the moon was high and cold, and the wagon was eerily still. A profound weakness held her limbs captive. She tried to call for Jebediah, but her voice was a dry rasp. Panic clawed at her throat. She pushed herself up her body, screaming in protest. The wagon was empty. Her bedding, the water barrel, the sack of dried jerky, all gone. A small water skin, barely a quarter full, had been left beside her, along with the 2 swaddled infants. A cruel mockery of mercy. She stumbled out of the wagon, her bare feet sinking into the cool sand. The oxen were gone. The horses were gone. There were no tracks but their own leading west. Jebediah, she screamed, the sound swallowed by the immense, indifferent silence of the desert. Silas only, the whisper of the wind, answered. He had left her. He had taken everything, and left her to die with her newborn sons in the middle of nowhere. The realization was not a sudden crash, but a slow, cold flood that filled her lungs and heart, extinguishing the last embers of hope. Why, the question hammered at her. The legacy, the land, the rumored gold. The twins were an inconvenience, a complication he had decided to erase. She looked down at the 2 bundles at her feet. Caleb and Noah, their tiny faces, serene in sleep, oblivious to the death sentence their father had just passed upon them. A new strength, born not of hope, but of sheer, unadulterated rage and maternal fury, surged through Elara. He would not win. She would not let his sons die. She would crawl through this hell if she had to. She would live if only to see the look on his face when he saw them again. She would be his living, breathing karma. With a grunt of effort, she tore strips from the hem of her dress, fashioning a crude sling to carry one baby on her chest and the other on her back. She took a miserly sip from the water skin, the tepid liquid a small blessing on her cracked lips. Picking a direction east back the way they came was the only choice she took. Her first faltering step into the vast, starlit darkness. She was Elara Thorne, a mother, and her war for survival had just begun. Part 2. The Badger and the Ghost, 3 suns had risen and set since the betrayal. Elara was a spectre moving through a landscape of shimmering heat and jagged rock. The water skin was empty, her milk was failing, and the twins' cries had weakened to pitiful mews. Her feet were raw, her vision blurred, and the line between the waking world and fevered dreams had dissolved. She had followed a dry creek bed, praying it would lead to water, but it had only led her deeper into the desolate heart of the Badlands. She finally collapsed at the base of a towering butte, its shadow offering the only respite from the relentless sun. She knew with a chilling certainty that this was the end. She arranged the twins beside her, shielding them with her own body, and whispered apologies to the tiny souls she had failed. Her last conscious thought was of Jebediah's sky-blue eyes, now a symbol of the cruelest deceit. Hoka of the Oglala Lakota moved through the land, not upon it, but as a part of it. His name meant Badger, a creature of the earth, quiet, observant, and possessing a strength that belied his size. He was tracking a small herd of pronghorn, his movements patient and fluid, when a scent on the wind gave him pause. It was not the scent of animal or earth. It was the scent of iron and milk and sickness, the scent of a white settler far from the established trails. Ordinarily he would have turned away. His own heart was a scarred landscape. 10 winters passed his wife, Mourning Dove, and their infant son had been lost to the coughing sickness the soldiers brought to the agency. His grief was a quiet companion, and his tolerance for the encroaching Wasichu was thin. They were a people who took without asking, who saw the land not as a mother, but as a thing to be broken and plundered. Yet his feet moved him forward, compelled by a curiosity that overrode his caution. He crested a ridge and saw it the abandoned Conestoga wagon, a hulking, bleached monument to some misfortune. He circled it warily. The tracks told a strange story. 2 men, horses, oxen heading west, a single set of a woman's bare footprints, stumbling, heading east. Why would they leave the wagon? Why would she walk barefoot into the wastes? He followed the woman's tracks, his keen eyes reading the story of her struggle in the sand, the faltering steps, the places she had fallen, the sheer, desperate will that had pushed her this far. He found her in the shadow of the butte. At first he thought she was dead. A ghost woman with hair the color of sun-bleached grass and skin blistered and pale. Then he heard it, a faint, kitten-like cry. He moved closer, his hand resting on the hilt of the knife at his belt. He saw the two infants, impossibly small, nestled against her still form. Hoka's breath caught in his chest. Napesni, he thought, courageous, to have come this far. He knelt, his shadow falling over her. Her eyelids fluttered. Blue eyes, clouded with fever but holding a flicker of defiance, met his. She tried to move to shield her children, a guttural sound of warning rumbling in her throat. Washichu Wingyang, he said softly, using the words for white woman. His voice was low and calm. I will not harm you. He saw the fear in her eyes, warring with a profound exhaustion. He pulled his own water skin from his belt, a much larger one made of buffalo bladder, and uncorked it. He gently lifted her head, letting a trickle of precious water moisten her lips. She drank greedily, then coughed, her body too weak to take more. She gestured feebly toward the babies. Hoka understood. He took a clean piece of buckskin from his pouch, dipped it in water, and carefully squeezed a few drops into each infant's mouth. They suckled at the wet leather, a desperate, instinctual act. Here was his choice. He could leave them. It was not his fight. This woman was part of the tide that was eroding his people's way of life. Her survival might mean the death of another buffalo, the fencing of another mile of sacred land. But as he looked at her face, her fierce, protective gaze fixed on her children, even in her delirium, he didn't see a nameless settler. He saw a mother. He saw the ghost of his own mourning dove. The spirits he believed didn't present such a choice without reason. To walk away would be to leave a piece of his own soul to wither in the sun alongside them. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his past sorrows, he made his decision. The pronghorn could wait. His work was swift and efficient. He was a healer as much as a hunter. He crushed herbs he carried in his medicine pouch yarrow to fight her fever willow bark for the pain, and mixed them with a little water to make a paste he applied to her lips. He knew he could not move all three of them at once. His village was a 2-day journey on foot. He built a small, crude shelter of brushwood over them to provide more shade. He left his large water skin and a piece of dried buffalo meat for her to gnaw on if she regained any strength. I will return, he said, looking directly into her eyes, willing her to understand. He yupo. Stay strong. He then carefully lifted the smaller, darker-haired boy, Noah. The infant was light as a bird in his arms. Securing the child in a sling against his chest, he began the journey back to his camp, his pace fast and steady. He would bring help. He had rescued one half of her heart. He prayed to Wakantanka that he would be in time to save the rest. As he walked, the tiny life breathing against his own chest was a strange and painful echo of a life he had lost, and a promise of a future he could not yet comprehend. Part 3. 2 worlds, 1 sky. The journey was a trial of endurance. Hoka reached his village as dusk settled, the small infant still breathing against his chest. His arrival with a white child caused a stir of murmurs and suspicious glances. He went straight to the teepee of the elder Tatanka Iyotake, or Sitting Bull, not the famous chief, but a respected medicine man of their small band. He explained what he had found. The elder listened, his ancient face, a mask of wrinkled leather, his eyes sharp and discerning. "You have taken on a great burden," Hoka Sitting Bull said, his voice like stones rolling in a stream. "The spirits test you. Why bring this trouble to our people? A mother is a mother, whether her skin is red or white," Hoka replied simply. "To leave them to the sun and the coyote would be to make our own hearts a desert." The elder nodded slowly. He saw the truth in Hoka's words and the pain in his eyes that this act had stirred. He dispatched 2 young men with Hoka, along with a travois pulled by a strong pony. They rode through the night. They found Ilara clinging to life, barely conscious, her other son, Caleb, nestled against her. She had not moved, husbanding what little strength she had. Seeing Hoka return as he had promised, a single tear traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek. The journey back was a gentle, slow procession. Ilara and her sons rode on the travois, shielded from the sun by a buffalo hide. Hoka rode beside them, offering her water and reassuring words she couldn't understand, but whose tone she could. In the Lakota camp, she was taken to a tipi set apart for healing. The women of the tribe, led by Sitting Bull's wife, Tassina, tended to her. They were wary at first, their faces stern, but the sight of the 2 helpless infants softened their edges. They clucked and cooed over the babies, their hands gentle as they cleaned them with damp moss and wrapped them in soft rabbit furs. They brought Ilara a thin, nourishing broth of venison and herbs. For weeks, Ilara drifted in and out of consciousness. Her body fought the fever and infection. In her lucid moments, she watched the life of the village unfold through the opening of the tipi. She saw a world so different from her own, a world of community, of quiet reverence for the earth, of children running free, their laughter echoing through the pines. Hoka would visit daily, sitting silently just inside the flap, a guardian at the gate of her recovery. He never asked her name or her story. He simply was. His presence was a quiet anchor in the stormy sea of her recovery. As her strength returned, she began to learn. Tassina taught her a few words of the Lakota language: money for water, ate for father, a word that tasted like ash in her mouth, Ina for mother. She learned to grind corn and stitch hides. She learned the rhythms of a life dictated by the sun and the seasons, not by the relentless pursuit of wealth. The boys, Caleb and Noah, thrived. They were passed from hand to hand, fussed over by a dozen surrogate grandmothers. Caleb with his fair hair and skin was a curiosity, but Noah with his dark hair and eyes and skin that tanned to a deep bronze seemed to fit seamlessly. He rarely cried, his dark eyes observing the world with a solemn wisdom that belied his age. Meanwhile, miles away, in the newly christened mining town of Redemption Gulch, Jebediah Thorne was a figure of profound tragedy and sympathy. He had stumbled into town alone, his clothes torn, his face a mask of grief. He told a harrowing story to anyone who would listen, a sudden, brutal attack by a Sioux war party. They had come at dusk, he'd wept, overwhelming him and his hired man. Brave Silas had been killed trying to defend the wagon. And his wife, his beautiful pregnant Ilara. Jebediah would choke on a sob, unable to finish. They had taken her. The townspeople wrapped him in their compassion. The sheriff, a portly man named Bartholomew Corbin, organized a posse, but they found only the abandoned wagon, its canvas slashed, and a few scattered spent cartridges Jebediah had planted himself. It was a perfect scene of tragedy. Jebediah was the sole survivor of a savage attack, a widower before he could even be a father. He was given credit at the general store, offered free drinks at the saloon. Men clapped him on the shoulder and told him he was a brave man. Women baked him pies and mended his shirts. He staked his claim on the land his uncle had left him, a rocky, unforgiving patch of ground in the hills outside town. He worked it with a feverish intensity, his grief, he claimed, fueling his labor. He was building the ranch he had promised Ilara, a monument to her memory. No one questioned his story. No one saw the flicker of cold calculation in his sky-blue eyes when he thought no one was watching. No one knew that Silas Croft was not dead, but had been paid a handsome sum to disappear south to Texas with a sealed mouth. Jebediah Thorne, the grieving widower, was a pillar of the burgeoning community, and as the first flecks of yellow glitter began to appear in the creek bed on his land, his status began to transform, from pitiable to prosperous. He was Jebediah Thorne, the man who had lost everything, and through sheer grit and the grace of God, was poised to gain it all back. Back in the Lakota village, Ilara had a new name. They called her Wiakaluta, or Red Feather, after a hawk's feather Hoka had placed in her hair, once she could walk again, a symbol of her fierce spirit. She was no longer just a survivor. She was becoming a part of the people. But every night as she watched her sons sleep, she would remember the face of their father. She was living under the same sky as him, breathing the same air. And she knew, with the certainty of a coming storm, that this sky was not big enough for both of them and his lie. The debt of karma had been accruing interest, and one day she would come to collect. Part 4. The Whispers of a Ghost. 18 years passed. The Dakota Territory grew. The railroad snaked its way across the plains, and the world changed. In the secluded Lakota village, Caleb and Noah grew into young men, shaped by two worlds. Ilara had raised them with her stories of Ohio, teaching them English and the alphabet by scratching letters in the dirt. But their souls were forged in the Lakota way by Hoka, who had become the father they would have otherwise never known. They learned to track, to hunt, to read the signs of the earth and sky. They learned the stories of the spirits and the history of the people. They were brothers bound by blood and circumstance, yet they were as different as the sun and the moon. Caleb, with his fair hair and blue eyes, always felt a step removed. Though he was a skilled hunter, his heart was restless. He was fascinated by Ilara's tales of the white man's world of bustling towns and machines that ran on steam. He was Red Feather's son, but he looked like the men they were taught to mistrust. Noah, called Seton Hawk by the tribe, was the opposite. His darker features allowed him to blend in, and his spirit was wholly Lakota. He was quiet, observant, and deeply connected to the spiritual world Hoka and Sitting Bull had shown him. He felt a fierce, protective loyalty to his mother and the people who had saved them, and a deep, simmering hatred for the faceless father who had discarded them. Ilara watched them, her heart a mixture of pride and as anxiety. She had given them a life of love and safety, but she had not given them their name, their inheritance. The lie Jebediah had built still stood, casting a long shadow over their lives. She had grown strong, her hands calloused, her face weathered by the sun, and wind, her spirit tempered like steel. The timid Ohio girl was gone forever, replaced by Wiakaluta, a woman who knew her own strength. Over the years, trickles of news from the white world would reach them through trappers and traders. They heard of the boomtown of Redemption Gulch and of its most prominent citizen, Mr. Jebediah Thorne. He was a man of immense wealth now. The Thorne mine was legendary, producing a steady stream of gold. He had built a grand house on a hill overlooking the town, a monument to his success. He never remarried, playing the part of the tragic widower, to perfection, a man eternally faithful to his martyred wife's memory. The irony was so bitter, it would have been laughable were it not her own life he had stolen and profited from. The story of her death was the foundation of his empire. In redemption, Gulch Jebediah Thorne was not a happy man. Wealth had brought him prominence, but not peace. His grand house was silent and empty, staffed by servants who feared his sudden, unpredictable rages. He drank heavily, his handsome face growing puffy, his sky-blue eyes often bloodshot and haunted. He was terrified of the dark, of the wind whistling through the eaves, of any unexpected knock on the door. He was a man haunted by a ghost who was very much alive. The first crack in his carefully constructed world appeared in the form of a grizzled old fur trapper named Elias Finch. Finch, who traded with the Sioux and other tribes, was in the Redemption Gulch saloon, swapping stories for whiskey. Saw the strangest thing up in the Black Hills. Finch slurred to the bartender, "A band of Oglala. And living with them is a white woman. Been there for years, they say. Got 2 grown sons with her. One of 'em is fair-haired as you or I, the other looks more like a native. A real strange sight." A man at the end of the bar, nursing his beer, went pale. He was a failed prospector, a man of quiet desperation, named Arthur Pendleton, who worked odd jobs for Jebediah Thorne. The description of the woman, the 2 sons. It was too close to the whispers he sometimes heard from the older ranch hands about Thorne's original story. He filed the information away. The biggest crack, however, came from within. Hundreds of miles south, in a dusty Texas border town, Silas Croft was dying. A lifetime of cheap whiskey and cheaper choices had rotted him from the inside out. He lay on a sweat-stained cot, his conscience long dormant, screaming at him in the quiet hours of the night. He had been an accomplice to what was in his heart attempted murder. The money Jebediah had given him was long gone, and all he had to show for it was a hollowed-out soul. With a shaking hand, he wrote a letter. He didn't know if Elara was alive, but he had to try to unburden himself. He didn't know where to send it, so he addressed it to the Sheriff of Redemption, Gulch, Dakota Territory. It was a confession. It detailed the lie, the abandonment, the cruelty of Jebediah Thorne. He described the birth of the twins and how they had been left to die in the desert. He sealed the letter and gave it to a traveling preacher, begging him to see it, delivered his last act on earth, an attempt at redemption. The letter began its slow journey north, a piece of paper that held the power to shatter an empire built on lies. Back in the Lakota camp, the decision was made. A young Lakota runner who had been to Redemption Gulch to trade returned with news that disturbed the entire village. The Thorne mine was expanding. Its operations were polluting a river that was a vital water source for the tribe's hunting grounds further downstream. The fish were dying, and the game was moving away. Jebediah Thorne's greed was now poisoning their land. For Elara, this was the final sign. He was not just a ghost from her past. He was a clear and present danger to the people who had saved her. That night, she sat with Hoka Caleb and Noah around a fire. "He is poisoning the water," she said, her voice steady and hard. "The life he built on our deaths is now killing the people who gave us life." Noah's hand tightened on the handle of his knife. Then he must be stopped. A man like that deserves to die. Noah Lara counted her eyes flashing in the firelight. Death is too easy for him. He must be unmade. Everything he has, everything he is a lie. The world must see him for the coward and the monster he is. The name Thorne is your birthright. The land is your inheritance. We are not going there for vengeance. We are going for justice. Caleb looked at her, his blue eyes filled with a mixture of fear and excitement. "We will go to this Redemption Gulch, to his town. "We will," Ilara confirmed. "He buried us in the desert 18 years ago. It's time his ghosts came home to haunt him." Hoka placed a calming hand on Noah's shoulder. He looked at Ilara not with surprise, but with a deep, knowing respect. He had known this day would come. "I will go with you," he said. It was not a question. The badger protects its own. The journey was planned. They would ride in not as savages, but as what they were, a family seeking to reclaim what was stolen. Ilara would wear a dress of tanned deerskin, a blend of her two worlds. The boys would ride as the warriors Hoka had trained them to be. A ghost, her two sons, and a Lakota warrior were about to ride into Redemption Gulch. The town had no idea the reckoning that was coming. Part 5. The Ghost of Redemption. Gulch. The town of Redemption Gulch sat in a dusty bowl, a sprawling, chaotic collection of clapboard buildings, tents, and half-finished structures, all centered around the grand two-story Thorn Saloon and Hotel. Dominating the landscape, perched on a hill like a vulture, was Jebediah Thorn's mansion, a stark, white monstrosity of gables and verandas, an arrogant declaration of wealth amidst the grit. The arrival of the four riders was an event. People stopped in the street to stare. A Lakota warrior, a white woman dressed in buckskin who carried herself like a queen, and two young men, one who could have been any settler's son, the other clearly of mixed heritage. They moved with a purpose that was both unnerving and captivating. Ilara's eyes scanned the town, a place built with the profits of her own suffering. Her gaze was cold and hard. She felt a tremor of fear, but it was buried under 18 years of hardened resolve. Hoka rode beside her, his face impassive, his eyes missing nothing: the number of men with guns, the layout of the streets, the location of the sheriff's office. Caleb looked around with wide-eyed curiosity, while Noah's expression was a thunderous mask of contempt. They dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. Sheriff Bartholomew Corbin, now much heavier, and with a permanent sheen of sweat on his brow, emerged, hitching up his gun belt. "Can I help you folks?" he asked, his eyes lingering on Hoka with suspicion. "We don't get many of your people in town unless it's for trade." "We are not here to trade, Ilara," said her voice clear and carrying in the sudden quiet of the street. It was a voice he should not know, but for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something ancient and familiar stirred in the sheriff's memory. "My name is Ilara Thorn," she declared, "and I have come to report the attempted murder of myself and my twin sons, Caleb and Noah Thorn." She gestured to the young men beside her. "The man who tried to kill us is Jebediah Thorn." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers who had gathered. The name Ilara Thorn was legend in this town, the sainted martyred wife. Sheriff Corbin's jaw went slack. "Ma'am, that's impossible. Ilara Thorn was killed by Sioux 18 years ago. Mr. Thorn he's the founder of this town." "The founder of this town is a liar and a thief," Ilara said, her voice ringing with conviction. "He left me in the desert to die after I gave birth to his sons, so he could have our inheritance for himself." "This man," she said, placing a hand on Hoka's arm, "found us and saved us. The people you call savages showed me more humanity than my own husband ever did." The crowd murmured the story, too fantastic to believe, yet too compelling to dismiss. The sight of Caleb with his fair hair and features so reminiscent of a younger Jebediah sent a shockwave of confusion through them. And Noah, his darker complexion, now seemed to support a different, uglier narrative. Word traveled through Redemption Gulch faster than a prairie fire. It reached the Thorn Saloon where Jebediah was in his private office counting receipts. Arthur Pendleton, The handyman who had overheard the trapper's story burst in without knocking. "Mr. Thorne, you have to come see. There's a woman. She's at the sheriff's office. She's saying she's your wife." Elara Jebediah dropped a stack of coins. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a sickly grey colour. He had played out this scene in 1,000 drunken nightmares, but he had never believed it could be real. "It's a trick," he snarled, grabbing the bottle of whiskey from his desk and pouring a large measure. "Some grifter trying to blackmail me. She has 2 sons with her Sir Pendleton pressed. And an Indian." Jebediah slammed the glass down, whiskey sloshing over the rim. He straightened his waistcoat, his mind racing, piecing together a counter-narrative. He had 18 years of goodwill built up in this town. She was a ghost with a fantastic story. He was a pillar of the community. He would crush her. He strode out of the saloon, the crowd parting before him. He walked toward the sheriff's office, his face set in a mask of pained indignation. He saw her, older, weathered, but unmistakably Elara. For a heart-stopping second, his composure shattered. It was truly her. The ghost was real. Then he saw the boys. And Hoka. His mind latched onto the perfect defense. "Elara," he said, his voice breaking with practiced sorrow. He rushed forward, his arms outstretched as if to embrace her. Elara stood her ground, her expression like granite. He stopped, feigning confusion. "My God. It is you. The savages. They didn't kill you. They kept you all this time." He looked at the boys, then at Hoka, and a look of dawning, horrified realization spread across his face. He pointed a shaking finger at Noah, then at Hoka. "What is this, Elara? You were with him." He spat the word, dripping with venom. "You shamed my memory. And this half-breed boy, he is not my son. You dare to come here after all these years with your savage lover and his bastard child to lay claim to my name." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The crowd, already biased, began to sway. It was a simpler, more palatable story. The woman had been captured, turned native, and had now returned with her half-breed son to steal from the man she'd betrayed. Caleb could be his yes. But Noah, he looked nothing like Jebediah. Noah took a step forward, his hand dropping to his knife, a low growl in his throat. Hoka's hand shot out, grabbing his arm with surprising strength. "Hiupo," he commanded quietly. "Stay strong." Elara didn't flinch. She had anticipated this. She had known he would use his silver tongue to twist the truth into a weapon. "You will not hide behind your lies anymore, Jebediah," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You can fool these people who have grown fat on your gold, but you cannot fool me. I was there. I remember the thirst. I remember the sun. And I remember the look in your eyes when you left us to be food for the vultures." Sheriff Corbin, hopelessly out of his depth, stepped between them. "All right, that's enough. This is a matter for a judge. We have a circuit judge, Judge Morrison, arriving in 3 days. We will hold a public hearing. Until then," he looked at Elara Hoka, "and the boys, you can stay at the hotel. No trouble." He then looked at Jebediah. "And you, Mr. Thorne, will stay away from them." Jebediah gave a short, bitter laugh. "Gladly, Sheriff. I will not have my good name dragged through the mud by this spectacle." He turned and stalked back toward his saloon, his mind already working, plotting. He had 3 days. 3 days to ensure his ghost was buried for good. Part 6. The Unraveling of a Lie. The 3 days leading up to the hearing were a crucible of tension. Elara Hoka and her sons were confined to 2 rooms in the Thorne Hotel, an irony that was not lost on them. They were pariahs, stared at, in the dining room, whispered about in the corridors. Jebediah, meanwhile, was working. He met with his lawyer a slick man from back east named Peterson. He bought drinks for influential townsfolk, reminding them of how his mine was the town's lifeblood. He painted a picture of himself as the ultimate victim, a man whose long-lost, unfaithful wife had returned to extort him. The story of the half-breed son, Noah, was his most potent weapon. In the deeply prejudiced society of the West, it was an easy lie to sell. Noah felt the weight of the stares, the sneers, the open hostility. It hardened his resolve and fueled his anger. Caleb, in contrast, was an object of pity, the true son caught in the middle of his mother's scandalous return. On the third day, the saloon was cleared out and turned into a makeshift courtroom. The room was packed, the air thick with sweat whiskey and anticipation. Judge Alistair Morrison, a stern, hawk-nosed man with a reputation for being thorough, presided. Jebediah and his lawyer sat at one table looking confident. Ilara sat at another with her sons and Hoka. She needed no lawyer. She had only the truth. Jebediah's lawyer presented their case first. It was the story the town already knew, the tragic Sioux attack, Jebediah's miraculous survival, his years of lonely grief and hard work. He then called Jebediah to the stand. Jebediah, dressed in a fine black suit, was the very picture of somber dignity. He spoke of his love for Ilara, the horror of her abduction, and his shock and pain at her return with a bastard child of a savage. I welcome my true son Caleb with open arms. Jebediah finished looking at Caleb with tears in his eyes. But I cannot and will not acknowledge this woman who sullied my name, nor the boy she bore to another man. It was a masterful performance. The room was moved. Judge Morrison, however, remained impassive. Mrs. Thorne, he said, his voice dry. Your turn. Ilara walked to the stand. She did not look at Jebediah. She looked at the faces in the crowd, the shopkeepers, the miners, the wives. My name is Ilara Thorne, she began, her voice steady. 18 years ago, my husband drove me and our newborn twin sons into the Dakota Badlands. He took our water, our food, and our animals, and left us to die. She recounted the story in stark, brutal detail, the agonizing birth, the chilling realization of her abandonment, the desperate stumbling journey, the brink of death. She described her rescue by Hoka and the kindness of the Lakota people. He claims Noah is not his son because his skin is dark, she said, her voice rising with passion. My own grandmother was a Cherokee woman from the hills of Tennessee, a fact my husband knew well, a fact he conveniently forgets. It is a heritage I am proud of, and it is a heritage I pass to my son Noah. This revelation sent a murmur through the crowd. You have no proof, Lawyer Peterson scoffed. It is the word of a woman who has lived with Indians for 2 decades, against that of a respected community leader. I have my memory, Ilara said, her eyes finally locking with Jebediah's. And I have my sons. She then paused, and I believe Sheriff Corbin may have something that belongs to me. Sheriff Corbin looked startled. Ma'am, a few days ago, Judge Morrison interjected. Looking at the sheriff, a letter arrived for your office by way of a traveling preacher. Given the names involved, I instructed you to hold it unopened until this hearing. Corbin flustered, fumbled in his desk drawer, and produced a worn, sealed envelope. He handed it to the judge. The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison broke the seal and read the contents, his expression growing grimmer with each line. This, the judge said, holding up the letter, is a deathbed confession. It is signed by a Mr. Silas Croft from Laredo, Texas. Jebediah's face went ashen. Silas. The one loose end he thought was buried by time and distance. Judge Morrison read the letter aloud. It was a complete account of the truth. Silas, fearing eternal damnation, had confessed everything Jebediah's plan to get the inheritance for himself, the lie about the Indian attack, the deliberate and cold-blooded abandonment of his wife and newborn twins. He described how Jebediah had paid him to disappear and keep silent. The room erupted. The foundation of Jebediah's life, of the entire town's perception of him, had just been dynamited. People who had clapped him on the back just yesterday were now staring at him with open disgust. But the final blow was yet to come. "This is a forgery," Jebediah screamed, leaping to his feet. "A lie concocted by this witch and her savage lover. Sit down, Mr. Thorne," the judge commanded. "There is more." He turned to Elara. "Your husband's fortune was built on the Thorne mine. Is that the land you claim as your inheritance?" "It is," Elara confirmed. "A claim deeded from his uncle, Robert Thorne." I see the judge said, a faint, grim smile touching his lips. "I was a federal land surveyor before I was a judge. I know this territory well. I knew Robert Thorne, a peculiar old prospector. He spent a decade searching for gold in these hills and found nothing. He was convinced this land was worthless." Jebediah looked confused. "What are you talking about? My mine has produced a fortune in gold, Mr. Thorne," the judge said, leaning forward. "Robert Thorne wasn't looking for gold. He was a geologist. He was searching for industrial minerals. I reviewed his claim myself years ago. He found a massive deposit of iron pyrite." A miner in the crowd gasped, "Fool's gold." The truth in all its brutal karmic glory dawned on the room. The few flecks of real gold you found in the creek were placer deposits washed down from miles away, the judge explained. They were enough to secure your initial investment. But the mine itself? The tons of glittering rock you've been shipping out for years. You've been selling worthless rock to investors who didn't know any better. Your entire fortune is a fraud built on top of a lie, built on top of an act of monstrous cruelty. Jebediah Thorne stood, frozen his world utterly and completely annihilated in the space of 10 minutes. He was not a grieving widower, but a would-be murderer. He was not a successful tycoon, but a deluded fraud. He looked around the room at the faces filled with contempt and hatred. He saw Elara not as a ghost, but as a righteous fury, an agent of a fate he had forged for himself 18 years ago in the desert. He let out a strangled, inhuman sound and collapsed into his chair, a broken, empty shell of a man. The unraveling was complete. Part 7. The Dust of Justice. Justice in the West was often swift and brutal, but what Judge Morrison delivered to Jebediah Thorne was a punishment far more fitting than a rope. Attempted murder after 18 years was a difficult charge to prosecute without a body, but fraud was not. Based on Silas Croft's letter and the judge's own testimony about the pyrite warrants, were issued for the seizure of all of Jebediah's assets. The mine, the grand house on the hill, the saloon, every dollar in the bank, it was all forfeit to be used to repay the countless investors he had swindled. Jebediah was not imprisoned. Instead, he was stripped of everything. He was a pariah in the town he had built. Men who had once sought his favor now spat at his feet. Children who had been told stories of his bravery now taunted him in the streets. He was forced to take a job mucking out the stables, the very stables where he once kept his fine horses. Every day he had to walk through Redemption Gulch, a living monument to his own spectacular fall, forced to look upon the faces of those he had deceived. He was left with nothing but the dust and the memory of his sins, a fate far crueler than a quick death. He had tried to leave his family with nothing in the desert, and now karma had returned the favor in the heart of his own kingdom. The original land claim, the worthless patch of rock his entire sordid empire was built upon, was legally returned to its rightful heirs, Caleb and Noah Thorne. The town, facing economic collapse with the mine's closure, held a town meeting. Ilara, Caleb, and Noah attended. Ilara stood before the people who had judged her so harshly just days before. "This land is my son's," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority she had earned. "But we have no interest in a mine full of fool's gold. My family and I were saved by the Lakota, and Mr. Thorne's operations were poisoning their water. We will be signing the deed over to them. Let them decide the future of this land. Let the river run clean again." It was an act of grace and justice that stunned the townspeople into silence, a final damning contrast to Jebediah's all-consuming greed. In the days that followed, the Thorne family had to decide its own future. They stood on the dusty main street of Redemption Gulch, a town that was now a part of their story. "I do not belong here," Noah said quietly, his eyes on the distant hills. "My home is with Hoka and the people. This world of the Wasichu, it is built on lies and fences." Caleb, however, looked around with a different expression. I think I might stay," he admitted. "For a while. These people are complicated, but they are also my people. I want to understand this part of myself. Maybe I can help this town rebuild, but on something more honest than gold." Ilara looked at her two sons, her heart aching with love for these two strong, different men. She had fought to give them a future, and now they were choosing their own paths. "Then this is where we part for now," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She pulled Caleb into a fierce embrace. "Be a good man, my son. Be better than your father." She then turned to Noah and Hoka. "My heart is with you," she said to Noah, clasping his hand. Then she faced Hoka, the man who had been her rescuer, her guardian, her truest friend. No words were needed between them. He simply nodded his eyes, conveying a universe of respect and shared history. As Ilara, Hoka, and Noah rode east away from Redemption, Gulch Ilara did not look back. She was not leaving a world behind, but returning to one. She had faced the monster from her past and had not only survived, but had won. She had reclaimed her name, her honor, and her sons' futures. The setting sun cast their long shadows before them, pointing the way home. She had been left to die in the bitter earth, but like a resilient desert flower, she had not only survived, she had bloomed nourished by a justice that, while slow, had finally irrevocably arrived. Conclusion. In the end, this wasn't just a story about one woman's survival. It was a testament to the idea that the universe in its own time balances its books. Jebediah Thorne didn't die in a shootout. He was sentenced to a long life of quiet insignificance, forced to live every day with the ghost of the man he pretended to be. Ilara didn't find a chest of gold. She found something far more valuable, her own strength, the love of her sons, and a home among a people who valued honor above all else. Her story teaches us that true wealth isn't what you can dig from the ground, but the integrity you build within your soul. It's a reminder that karma isn't always a lightning bolt from a clear sky. Sometimes it's a slow, steady erosion, like the wind wearing down a mountain of lies, until only the truth remains. If this story of resilience and hard-won justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a real-life drama from the Old West. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales of history survival and the unshakable power of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.